I'm Paap. I lead many of the KubeVirt efforts at Platform9. In this video, I want to provide a quick refresher on what KubeVirt is, as well as a demo of how easy it is to use with Platform9. So let's jump right into it. What is KubeVirt and why is it so important to your enterprise? Quite simply put, KubeVirt allows you to run both virtual machines and containers side by side inside Kubernetes. In fact, KubeVirt is a full-featured virtual machine management system based on Kubernetes. It provides many common features that people often use in a platform such as VMware, but uses the open source KVM hypervisor. KVM has been tried and tested over large-scale deployments. It has been developed over the years to be stable, easy to use, and reliable. Most people don't realize there is a truly enterprise-ready alternative to VMware, and it doesn't require you to be a Kubernetes expert. Let me show you a demo of KubeVirt in action.
What is KubeVirt and why should you care? Simply put, KubeVirt allows you to run virtual machines and containers side by side in Kubernetes. In fact, KubeVirt is a full-featured virtual machine management system based on Kubernetes. It provides many common features that people often use in a platform such as VMware, but uses the open source KVM hypervisor. KVM has been tried and tested over large-scale deployments, with some of the technology components having been developed over the years. So you may be surprised how stable, easy to use, and reliable this is. Most people don't realize that there is a truly enterprise-ready alternative to VMware, and it doesn't require you to be a Kubernetes expert in using it. Let me show you a demo of KubeVirt in action. First of all, I will walk through a demo of how to enable KubeVirt in a Platform9 deployed Kubernetes cluster. It's super simple. We are going to go into an existing cluster and see what that's like, and you can actually look at the add-ons that are deployed from it, and then we can go into see that KubeVirt is enabled on it. It's version 5.8. Advanced networking, what we call Luigi, is a requirement when you enable the KubeVirt add-on. It's going to install the most current version. We also have a requirement to install our advanced networking, which we tongue-in-cheek called Luigi, because it's the network plumbing that we've laid out to make advanced networking easier and more scalable. This is important because if you just as something as simple as adding an additional NIC, Multis provides that functionality, so you need Luigi for that. Or if you need high performance, low latency networking such as SRIOV or OVS or DBDK, that type of functionality is enabled by Luigi, and those are plugins within Luigi. So it is a requirement when you enable that plugin. Once you enable that plugin, if you click on the application selector and go down to KubeVirt, it'll drop you into a dashboard. That dashboard is going to give you a 50,000 foot overview of your KubeVirt environment in general health. This is all the KubeVirt clusters, so it's not every cluster in your environment. For instance, if you have 100 clusters and only 6 of them are KubeVirt, it's only going to give you a version of kind of a filter of just those 6 KubeVirt specific clusters. It's going to give you cluster health, host health, number of virtual machines, what power state they are, the add-on that we just looked at and enabled, what is the add-on health for each of those clusters. If you click right below that under virtual machines, we've done a lot of work over 5.6 and 5.7 on what's going on in the environment, and kind of like this kind of screen right here that kind of gives you kind of that very brief at a glimpse view of what VMs are running, what state they're in, if they're provisioning, if they're stopped, or if there's an error. But we've also built in the ability to run management actions without having to go into the VM details. So it's making it quite simple if you need to live migrate or stop your machine. When you select a VM, we did a lot of work into a complete revamp of the VM details, making it even easier to use for day-to-day operations, right? So if we're thinking of like the day in the life of a KubeVirt admin, a virtualization admin running KubeVirt, like all your management functionality is across the top. If you want to select the console, like if you're sitting at a KVM console at the keyboard, that's what that'll provide. If you need to live migrate that VM, you select that and it'll kick it off in the background. You can access the YAML files if you want to, and still they're editable. You can copy it and download it. This is if you're kind of getting into some advanced functionality or you need to make changes. We try to provide some contextual information as well. For every VM that comes up in KubeVirt, it launches a pod that's associated with that VM. So we try to show contextual information by showing that pod and then showing all information. If you're troubleshooting, you can select on the events or go to the logs, view the YAML, kind of how it's laid out. We have your disks, and in terms of like persistent storage, we show data volumes, which is a construct of KubeVirt pulled in from the container data importer. Shows like the access mode, the source, what it's coming from. Access mode is important as a side note. One of the few requirements for live migration is that the access mode is read-write many. If it's read-write once, it won't live migrate. You'll have to shut off the VM and then migrate it then. Your container network, your default NIC on the VM is set up to masquerade. If it's set up to bridge, it won't live migrate. So there's two requirements for live migration. You have networking information. This is the container IP. The default is set up with one NIC. If you added additional NICs, they would show up here. You can edit and add CPU and memory resources inside the VM. This is if you wanted to kind of go up to 4 and like 8, right? You can do that here. If you select advanced options, this is where we expose CPU pinning or requests and limits for memory and CPU. There's 2 ways of setting up CPU pinning within KubeVirt. That's the default is configure topology, where you set up, for instance, if we wanted to set up CPU pinning, 2 sockets, 2 cores, and 2 threads, for instance, we want to kind of go all the way down. Then if those resources are available on that host, it's going to make a socket on that physical node, and a core, 2 cores, and 2 threads are always going to be available to that specific VM. It's not enabled by default. You have to select advanced functionality and enable that, and then you can set up those advanced options for the applications that require that kind of dedicated CPU resources for performance. We've added that in the 5.7 release. As you click down into on the left here under live migration, we added a live migration dashboard. And the benefit of this dashboard is twofold. One is to give you kind of an overview of kind of globally, whether globally mean like which clusters you choose, which KubeVirt clusters, you can focus down on one cluster or all of them, of all the live migrations that are happening in your environment, right? If you just kind of want to see what's going on. The second part of this that makes it a valuable very valuable dashboard in kind of day-to-day operations is a use case where if you were taking a host down for maintenance reasons and you were live migrating, once you kind of are taking that host down and you're migrating 20 VMs. Well, the default configuration for KubeVirt, which can be changed, but the default for concurrent live migrations is 2 concurrent live migrations per node, and then it's total of 5 concurrent per cluster. So if you have 20 VMs, only 2 at a time can migrate. That can be changed, but then you have 18 that are pending, and then you can watch the 2 that are migrating and whether they succeeded or not, and you can see them kind of pass through, and then determine if you need to go and troubleshoot one that didn't live migrate correctly for whatever reason, if everything was set up correctly. So it gives you like a bird's eye view to actually, make sure that what migrated did migrate, or if there was a use case, I guess there's a third use case that you came in, there was application slowdowns, and maybe an overzealous admin that was delegated too much control was migrating a lot of VMs at one time, right, during peak usage times. It's a database that was high throughput, high IO database that they're live migrating like crazy. Not ideal, so you can kind of look at that and then remove their permissions if needed. Another big addition that we're excited about that's new to KubeVirt as well as Platform9 is they've replaced presets for kind of setting up templates for CPU and memory with instance types. So instance types, when you create them, it's just very simple. You can create one called large. And in this case, you can scope an instance type by cluster and namespace. So we just set the cluster to, let's say, K7 cluster and default KV C7 cluster default. And let's set this to 1, and it's going to be large. So let's set this to 2 and 4 gigs of memory. And then you complete that. Where that comes into play, this gives you the ability now to set a standard if you're provisioning a lot of VMs, or you're giving access to a DevOps team to only spin up, if we call this DevOps large, so then you only want them largest VM to spin up, 2 CPU, 4 gigs of memory, so they're not going 4 CPU, 16 gigs of memory when it's not needed. You can standardize in your deployments when you're adding VMs. So when you're adding a VM to your environment, choose the right cluster. If we chose a different cluster that wasn't assigned to you, then you wouldn't see that instance type. So that's how you kind of spec that out. You can actually, we're back in instance types. Let's go into virtual machines. So when you go to add a virtual machine, select that instance type, or that cluster type, and then select the namespace, virtual machine standard. This is where you select read write many, read write once. We're just gonna, for the sake of this, we're gonna clone an existing one. Use disk, hit next. And you can either set, when you get to the resource section, you can either set, manually the amount of memory you want, or the benefit of instance type is if you, like I said, you're delegating this out, you're creating multiple VMs at once, and you want to keep them standardized. This is where you can kind of select the one that was named to that namespace and correct cluster. So in that case, when you do that, it has it. This is where you set your masquerade or your bridge mode. Masquerade is needed for live migration. If you created network attached definitions using Luigi, this is where you add your additional OVS networks or SROV or DBDK. They would show up here, and every one you select would be an additional NIC on that VM. Fine, click next. Cloud init gives the opportunity to upload a cloud init script or copy and paste a cloud init script for things that are such as, setting default admin password, or like setting an SSH key, for instance. Putting that here so that all VMs that are created will have that. So you have the ability to create more than one VM at a time. This is your advanced YAML view. So this is editable. If you wanted to make changes or make some very, very advanced functionality changes, you can go in here and do that. And then there's just the finalize and review. Create, and you have a VM that's created. So in this case, it's undefined only because we haven't started the machine up. I set it to manual, so we can actually start it up. It'll start kind of provisioning in the background. That's what I wanted to go over today. Just feel free to kind of click through. I think there's some great resources that you can check on for Platform9 KubeVirt. One of which is if you go to the platform9.com/docs. You will actually see a landing page that shows KubeVirt, Managed KubeVirt. Just click on that and it'll take you right to the most current release notes, as well as general documentation on getting started, installing, networking, that type of thing, lifecycle management. Lots of information here, what's new in the release, what we've added in 5.7. Another good website to check out as well to get really in depth and kind of background of the underlying KubeVirt capabilities is KubeVirt.io. That is the community website. There's a lot of good information out there as well. So feel free to reach out to Platform9 with any of your questions. Thank you.